Do you really need an upper back row, or are Kelso shrugs better? Recently, there's been an argument circulating on the internet on whether or not you need a transverse row within your program to grow your traps, or if you should just stick to shrugs. So let's talk about it. When we consider the traps, we are primarily talking about scapular retraction. While many have proposed that the upper traps need some sort of elevation, this doesn't really seem to be true, and the upper traps visibly don't have great leverage in pure elevation. But in a transverse row, we have multiple actions at play that aren't just scapular retraction. When your shoulder is more abducted, the rear delts are going to be the primary movers for shoulder extension within the movement, as the leverages of the lats are going to decrease significantly to a point where they cannot contribute to the movement depending on the position of your shoulder. We also see this present within muscle activation and how much more active the rear delts are within a pure horizontal abduction transverse row. Since the rear delts compared to the traps are significantly smaller and thus can't produce as much force in transverse rows, the rear delts can be a limiting factor to an extent, and thus with shrugs you can on paper get the most out of your trap training. But at the same time, we need to consider practical applications. Most of you watching are probably going to be running an upper lower full body, or if you're a fan of my content, half body split, and with all of these high frequency splits you need to be very intentional about your exercise selection and volume management. But if you were to separate a transverse row into a rear delt fly and a Kelso shrug, you may be able to get a little bit more out of your trap training, but this also comes at the cost of having to sequence another exercise, which also adds its own fatigue. Also, not all rows are made equal. This row here has a resistance profile that makes it harder to perform scapular retraction, so a Kelso shrug on this machine might make sense. But on this row, I can change the resistance profile so that I can focus more on scapular retraction than the other row. Here, it wouldn't really make much sense to do a shrug in my opinion. If you are able to program a pure scapular retraction movement without consequence, then go ahead, but it's by no means necessary, and a regular row is perfectly fine. While a pure scapular retraction movement may be better, it's pretty difficult to quantify how much more trap growth you'll get doing shrugs over rows. Unless you have a problem with performing scapular retraction either due to your equipment or technique, I think a transverse row makes more sense from a practicality standpoint, but it's really up to you.